Good evening. I'm Nima, and this is Forum Daily for Thursday, December 29th. And we begin tonight with an all-too-familiar concern. The National Public Health Agency says it's closely monitoring the COVID-19 situation in China. This comes after the country lifted many of its virus restrictions. But the Public Health Agency of Canada gives no indication that it's planning to follow the U.S. by requiring that travelers from China be tested for the virus. The agency says any policy changes will be made in a travel health notice. Tuesday's on-duty shooting death of OPP Constable Greg Prashala made him the sixth Canadian police officer to die since September. Mark Baxter is president of the Police Association of Ontario, and he says in his 18 years of policing, he's never seen anything like this. He says OPP officers receive extensive training at the Ontario Police College to prepare them for what they may deal with in the field. But when it comes to the recent deaths, he says no amount of training could have prepared them for what they have encountered. Mr. Baxter said the rise in violence and police use of force incidents speaks to some greater societal challenges, which include access to help for mental health, addiction, and homelessness. Tragedy on the East Coast as Atlantic Canadians are remembering a lost fisherman who went overboard over the holiday season. Online fisher forums from Newfoundland and Labrador to Nova Scotia posted messages honoring Christian Atwood. He was one of 3 crew members aboard the Little Weasel II fishing vessel, which went overboard on Boxing Day morning. Rescue crews recently called off the search for Mr. Atwood. This was after unsuccessfully attempting to locate him. Well, in international news, Canada, the UK, Sweden, and Ukraine have called on Iran to agree to binding arbitration for the shooting down of a Ukrainian Airlines flight nearly 3 years ago. The group of nations made the request this week following years of unsuccessful negotiations with the Iranian government for reparations and accountability. The case could go to the International Court of Justice if Iran does not agree to the demand within 6 months. All 176 people on board, including Canadian citizens and permanent residents, were killed. This was when Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard shot down the flight just minutes after takeoff in January 2020. Turning now to Western Canada, where one person has died in a chain reaction crash north of Calgary on Tuesday night. It involved more than a dozen vehicles. Airdrie RCMP suggest poor weather and road conditions were behind the wreck. Police say 9 other people were taken to hospitals for various non-life-threatening injuries. 1 year after Quebec became the first jurisdiction in Canada to launch a 2-pronged tracking system for domestic violence suspects, aid groups want to know more. The tracking equipment is composed of a bracelet for the suspect and a mobile device application, which allows the victim to monitor the suspect's movements. Louise Riendeau is a spokesperson for a victims' rights group that works with women's shelters, and she says the bracelets are a tool, but not a magic solution. Ms. Riendeau says it's unclear how often authorities consider ordering suspects to wear the bracelets versus how many times the devices are actually used. Canada's 2 major airlines are falling behind, at least when it comes to being on time. Aviation analytics company Cirium says Canada's 2 biggest airlines ranked low in terms of on-time performance this year. The data firm says that among the 10 biggest airlines in Canada and the U.S., Air Canada and WestJet Airlines ranked the worst and second worst in their punctuality. Cirium says Air Canada had on-time arrivals for about 55.6% of its roughly 143,000 flights as of mid-December. WestJet managed on-time arrivals for 60.7% of its roughly 89,000 flights. Indigenous languages are spoken and heard every day across the North, thanks to elders, teachers, translators, and broadcasters committed to revitalizing their languages. Gila Paula Cloutier in Nunavut was part of efforts to make Inuktitut and Inuinnaqtun available on Microsoft Translator. Despite this, UNESCO says about 75% of Indigenous languages in Canada are endangered. Indigenous governments and organizations say there is a need for stable, long-term funding to support languages. Tennis player Felix Auger-Aliassime has been selected as the Canadian Press Male Athlete of the Year. The 22-year-old from Montreal won 4 ATP Tour events last season and led Canada to its first ever Davis Cup title. Mr. Auger-Aliassime started the year ranking 11th in the world and closed the season at number 6. He received 20 of 48 votes in balloting from sports editors and broadcasters across Canada. Soccer player Alphonso Davies placed second in the voting. Forum Daily will be right back after the break with a look at investing in 2022 and what to look ahead for in 2023. A conversation with Brendan Caldwell, director at Caldwell Securities Limited, up next. Well, it's been a bumpy year for investors, considering the fall of crypto giant FTX, the impact of Russia's war in Ukraine, and a lot more. This year was one of 5 in 100 years in which the U.S. Treasuries and the S&P 500 were in the red. 2022 saw central banks around the world raise key interest rates quickly to fight inflation. Supply chain issues snarled the global flow of goods. Energy prices have soared, and for many, a cost of living crisis continues to worsen. So will 2023 be the light at the end of the tunnel for the investing world? Well, joining us now to give us more insight into this is Brendan Caldwell, director at Caldwell Securities Limited. Brendan, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Happy New Year, Nima. It's good to be here. Looking forward to whatever the new year brings.
Me too, me too. Now, in terms of this previous year that we're about to say goodbye to, can you walk us through the major events of 2022 when it comes to the world of investing?
Well, I'm going to walk you through all the major events. I think you did a pretty good summary, but if there was one that I would add to it, or at least emphasize, it's interest rates. Interest rates, when it comes to investing, really are the determining factor. And the world had been coasting along on interest rates levels so low that no one had ever seen them before. 0, 1%, 2%. Interest rates had never been that low for any protracted period of time. And so to see interest rates beginning to normalize, to go back up to levels that at least history records, so what is a 5-year mortgage now? 5 something percent. That historically isn't a big number, but from what we've been used to, that has been a big number, and it's having a tremendous effect on everything from stock markets to the housing market to, as you pointed out, people's ability to afford the cost of living.
And in addition to these interest rates, what other events stood out most to you in this year, 2022, in terms of the world of investing, Brendan?
Oh, well, I think that, psychologically, the war in Ukraine has probably had the biggest effect. You would have thought, and my eldest daughter said to me a couple of years ago that her generation was holding on through COVID because they anticipated that this would be the roaring 20s once COVID was over, where good times and parties and love, joy, peace, and Woodstock. That's not what's materialized. So I think both the hit to the global sense of cooperation, it's an understatement. The world is really becoming very nationalistic, or at least regionalistic, isolated, and walls that came down before you were born and when I was a kid are now being thrown up again in different places and for different reasons. But that reversal of globalization will probably have the longest and most profound lasting impact on the economy of the next generation.
Indeed. Now, switching gears to a look at the future, we know we're just a few days away from 2023. Any predictions for the new year, Brendan? Maybe any positive predictions?
Well, I think that the interesting similarities that we've been through over the last little while has been to the year 2000. What we've seen in terms of the unwinding of crypto and blockchain, which were all very hot and now are not, resembles the dot-com bubble of the late 90s and then the tech wreck of the early 2000s. So you flash forward 20 and a bit years, I think that one can look through the rubble, as one could have done 20 odd years ago, and look for how the world will actually evolve from here. Because out of this rubble of crypto and Bitcoin and other technology stocks, there will be the technologies that do fuel the next generation. I do think that blockchain will be, in some form or other, a dominant, an important way, at least, that financial and other transactions take place. So somewhere in that rubble, I think there are going to be some great opportunities. So I think one can look back helpfully to the 2000s, but look forward optimistically, knowing that something good will come out of all that's fallen down in the last 12 months.
All right, Brendan, a quick 30 seconds left here, but if you could give investors one piece of advice when it comes to preparing for this upcoming new year, what would it be?
I would do three things. As Syrio Forel from Game of Thrones said, look with your eyes. And unless you have eyes in the back of your head, you need to be looking forward. To that end, pay down your debts, fix any floating rate loans that you have, and start a monthly contribution plan. Because if you're building wealth little by little, it'll leave you in very good stead going forward. And if I one last thing, give a little bit of money away. You will feel better about yourself, your situation, and the world around you if you find someone or something to which you can contribute on a charitable basis.
Always great advice, Brendan. Thank you again for your time today.
Happy New Year, Nima.
Happy New Year. We'll be right back. As the holiday season draws to a close with the beginning of the new year, the spirit of giving doesn't have to end. Considering the rising cost of living in Canada and around the world, the need is there. But finding the right charity or nonprofit to give to amid hundreds of organizations to choose from may not be an easy feat. And knowing exactly where your donations are going is all the more important amid this economic uncertainty. Well, joining us now to help us with this is Ms. Kate Bahen, Managing Director at Charity Intelligence Canada. Ms. Bahen, welcome to Forum Daily.
Thanks for having me.
So can you tell us a little bit more about Charity Intelligence Canada and how it measures the impact of charities in the country?
Absolutely. So it's the last 2 days of giving before the tax deadline on December 31st. And I don't know about you, but it seems to be blitz time with all these charity ads running on television. I was just watching today, 66 cents a day pays for a guide dog, $200 pays for a child's operation. These ads are completely outlandish. They are not substantiated by facts. And that's exactly what Charity Intelligence does. Our website has the facts and the figures on over 800 Canadian charities. It's a review that you can go to for independent and objective information to make an informed giving decision so that you know what the charity does, how it actually spends your money, and hopefully you can find how your dollar can do the most good this giving season.
Now, that's a really interesting point that you bring up, that these advertisements may not be giving you accurate messages in terms of where your money is going and how much of an impact your money has. So can you tell us a little bit more about the top impact charities, at least in 2022, from your research?
Terrific. So you've got thousands and thousands of charities in Canada, and our analysis, we really look at sort of the 800. So it's a small proportion, but those 800 get 57% of the $18 billion Canadians give each year. You're going to see really wide differentiation. You're going to see great charities, and you're going to see charities that have a 1-star or a 0-star rating. There's such a difference. On the impact side, we do the measurement. We're economists, we're research analysts, we're data nerds, and we go into measuring what does this charity do and how does it actually change lives. And when you do this modeling, you can see some charities are simply outstanding. And those are the ones on our 2022 top 10 impact list. For those charities, when you make a donation, they're having about 7 times the difference that making a donation to an average charity does. So we hope that our information and our lists give you as a donor greater confidence, more information, and also an edge so that your giving can do the most good possible.
All right, Ms. Bahen, well, with so much need, as you said, amid this rising cost of living, we have so many charities to choose from. How can Canadians go about choosing the right charity to give to?
I would say do your homework first. Really, really do your homework. When you talk about the rising need, Canadians are incredibly generous, and giving is up. Giving is up about 10% across the board this year. So Canadians have dug deep throughout the COVID pandemic, and they have given a lot to food banks and they have given a lot to shelters. So just be aware that charities change and the situations change. And on our website, again, are those research reports. So you can see which charities really need your money, which ones have a great need for donations. Some charities, about 15%, are very rich already. They have millions of dollars in the bank. And you really have to question, with the money I can give this year, is this the best way to give my money? So there's lots of information. Just always don't feel rushed. Don't feel hurried. Give yourself some time to do a little homework, do a little research, and really come to understand the charities you're supporting.
All right, Ms. Bahen, just about a minute left here, but on that note of the charities that are actually in need right now, can you tell us a little bit more about what kind of charity sectors were hit hardest this year?
Well, actually, the charity sectors that we've seen the biggest gains in donations are food banks. Food banks were incredibly popular with Canadian donors. There was a big pivot during COVID where many food banks, the largest food banks, received, millions of dollars in donations. Some of them have been able to use that money quickly. So they are in a very strong financial position to meet the rising demand. But then again, there were some charities that are really strapped and haven't benefited as much. So I would say that's mostly the local charities. There we see giving is down about 2% year over year.
The European Union is assessing Beijing's rollback of its strict anti-infection controls, but it refrained from immediately following EU member Italy in requiring COVID tests for airline passengers coming from China. Health officials from the 27-member bloc promised to continue talks on seeking a common approach to travel rules. More than 50% of people screened upon arrival at Milan's Malpensa airport in recent days tested positive for the virus. We turn now to the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, where Russian missiles have hit the country in the biggest wave of strikes in weeks. Power stations and other critical infrastructure were damaged amid freezing winter weather. Local officials report the attacks killed at least 2 people around Kharkiv, Ukraine's second largest city. Russia dispatched explosive drones to selected regions overnight. This was before broadening the barrage with air and sea-based missiles. Israel officially has a new government. Benjamin Netanyahu has been sworn into office. He takes the helm of the most right-wing and religiously conservative government in Israel's history. He's vowing to implement policies that could cause domestic and regional turmoil and alienate the country's closest allies. His new government aims to prioritize settlement expansion in the occupied West Bank, extend massive subsidies to his ultra-Orthodox allies, and push for sweeping reform of the judicial system, which could endanger the country's democratic institutions. Moving to the Korean Peninsula now, where a freight truck collided with a bus on a highway near the South Korean capital of Seoul. This caused a fire that killed at least 5 people. Officials say at least 37 other people were injured. The National Fire Agency said in a statement that 3 of the injured were in serious condition, while 34 others were lightly injured. All right, well, south of our border, authorities are reopening the roads in storm-besieged Buffalo. This comes as rescue crews continued searching for people who may have died or been stuck and suffering after last week's blizzard. The driving ban in New York's second most populous city was lifted just after midnight, but Mayor Byron Brown is urging residents not to drive if they don't have to. This comes as more than 36 deaths have been reported in western New York following days of severe weather. And travel chaos continues in the U.S. as Southwest Airlines flight cancellations continue to snowball. Another 2,500 flights were pulled from arrival and departure boards Wednesday, and more are expected throughout the day. Exhausted travelers are seeking alternative routes with other airlines, on the ground by rental car or train, or they've simply given up. According to the FlightAware tracking service, more than 91% of all canceled flights in the U.S. early Wednesday were from Southwest, which has been unable to recover from ferocious winter storms that hit large parts of the country over the weekend. TikTok continues to make news in the U.S. as the governor of Kansas has become one of the first Democratic governors in the U.S. to ban the use of TikTok on state-issued devices. Laura Kelly's action yesterday to restrict the popular social media app comes 5 days after Congress approved the $1.7 trillion omnibus spending bill, which banned TikTok from most U.S. government-issued devices for employees. Republican governors in at least 15 states have imposed such restrictions. Ms. Kelly is citing the same concerns that some other officials have about security and the privacy of users' data. Well, as the holiday season comes to a close, disposing of your Christmas tree is part of the holiday cleanup. While many would think it can be as simple as bringing your tree to the landfill, experts warn against it. This is because materials buried there break down into greenhouse gas methane, which is considered more harmful than carbon dioxide. Discarded Christmas trees can be picked up on the curb for recycling through regular trash collection services. The trees are often shredded for use as compost or mulch, which is offered back to residents and nonprofit groups free of charge for gardening and landscaping. David St. Jacques says he has always been obsessed with the notion of perspective from the physical, such as understanding where we are in space and what's beyond the clouds, to the philosophical. The Canadian astronaut and physician has had more opportunities than most to explore all the meanings of that word. He orbited Earth for 240 days and saw just how exposed we are in the cosmos. Governor General Mary Simon announced this morning that Mr. St. Jacques and 98 others are being appointed to the Order of Canada. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Remember, for more news on demand, you could always visit our website, thenewsforum.ca, and make sure to follow us on our social media handles on Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. You can also watch all of our commentary, programming, and interviews on the News Forum YouTube channel. All right, thanks again for joining us today on Forum Daily News, and we'll see you next time. Take care, Canada.